When I negotiate my contract, I have certain deliverables, and we look at the metrics and what are those measures and how will we know that we've accomplished what we set out to do. So that's how we know when my work is done. And usually my work is a pretty definitive timeline. So by this date, what we expect to have, for example, we expect to have pilots for the new technology in 3 regions by this date. Or we expect people to be talking about this new project with enthusiasm throughout the organization. So the metrics can be qualitative or quantitative, either one, right? And that's what we look for, and we say, okay, mission accomplished. But now your work is a whole different story. When you're the leader, when it's your family, when it's your company, your work is never done. You're constantly educating, you're constantly teaching, you're constantly inspiring. It's part of the role. And if I were in EPA, if I were an employee in EPA, and I had bought into this initiative and I wanted this dream to come true, then I would say that I would expect to be working on this dream until I retire. I would be expecting that this idea of unity, of a powerful synergy, of being considered a global participant and having a unique contribution that is highly valued, that is something that would never be finished. That I would always be looking. It's like the race to excellence has no finish line kind of a thing. So that's why I've separated those into 2 different responses. Yes, sir.
Seth, can you talk about whether there's a difference in terms of the approach when you're trying to create change in times of abundance versus in times of reduction?
Sure. And is there a particular kind of change that you want me to address, or is it general? Anything?
I'm talking about whether there's a different approach to make that change happen. One, you're trying to adapt to, increasing resources or greater mission or whatever the case may be. Right. And the other one, you're trying to adapt to reduction in mission or reduction in resources, and you have to get to another state in both of those.
Well, the preference is always to be making the change when you're in a state of abundance. But the truth is that change is generally easier in a time of reduction. And the reason is because the reduction creates a pressure that doesn't exist in the abundance. Often it's very difficult to get people to change the way they're doing things when things are going very well. In fact, it's often the time when you most need to be aware of that, because you can avoid getting to that other time if you do it effectively. But the lever for change, the pain that's felt, works very well to keep people focused on what needs to be done. It's just like when you have a crisis, a lot of times people pull together. So there are different methods. A lot of times the soft part, the human part, you don't have to spend as much energy on when you're in a crisis situation, because people are contributing that, because they're worried. However, you have to make sure that you're doing a good job of speaking to what they're genuinely concerned about. So sometimes I've been in situations where there's a crisis, but the leader is trying to pretend that nothing's going wrong and just saying, okay, we're going to rally around this, it's time for everyone to be inspired, and people know. It's like they talk about the elephant in the room, or the writing is on the wall. So you need to have people whose message is in concert with the experience of the people that they're speaking to. Do you want to ask me more about that? I have a sense that there's maybe kind of another level to that question.
No, it was a question on the differences of approaches and what you needed to emphasize more or less given the situation.
Uh-huh.
I think you addressed some of that.
Okay, thank you. You have another question, please?
Microphone.
There you go.
I don't know if I missed this at the beginning, but could you talk a little bit, you've talked about storytelling. Could you kind of expound a little bit about that, your storytelling?
Yes, I can. Let me actually see if I can come back to some of the stuff up here. So, talk a little bit about management and how managers can support initiatives. This is actually, some of the stuff I'm about to show you is built from a training that I did for government managers. The question was, how do we create engagement with our staff? We're used to telling them what they need to do. How do we move to a different experience with them? And this is where the storytelling comes in. Because storytelling is a very natural human way to engage someone in a context, which is what you want. You want people to be transposing a circumstance to their own circumstances instead of prescribing to them behavior. Because if you prescribe behavior, you can only do it within certain environmental constraints, and mostly people are not in those. They'll quickly be outside of them. So one of the skills for getting ideas to spread is to lead conversations that get people involved. And when I tell you my story, that's a very effective way for me to get you involved. Storytelling can actually be a very efficient way to communicate. People don't think of that because they're all used to, going to a party and having someone bend their ear for like much longer than they want to. But if you're using it professionally, you can actually tell a very good story in somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds. And you can also ask people to tell you stories from their life. So for example, let's say that I had a group of people and my job was to get them involved in cost-cutting measures because the department needed to save money or something like that. I might tell them, let me tell you about a time in my life when I was in a similar circumstance. And I go into a little bit of the detail, some of the personal detail. I was working in a unit in NASA once. We had funds shared throughout the department, and there was one particular project that ran way over budget, and so they asked us all to jump in and trim our own budgets. And believe me, it's not what I wanted to do, but I had to do it in order to perpetuate our department. So that's an experience for my life, and we're kind of in that kind of a situation right now. Have you ever had an experience like that in your own life? And someone might say, well, I haven't professionally, but I've certainly experienced it personally. I know that there's been months when we've had lean months at home, and I've had to withhold things that I wanted to do. Maybe I couldn't buy as many books at Borders or something because we had to make sure that we made the rent that month. All of a sudden now, you're at a whole different level of participation than you are if you just say, cut 10% off your budget. Now it's connected to your life, to who you are as a human being, and you have and people can also bring to you their challenges, whereas before they might just feel like, I just got to get the 10%, But now they could say, I'm trying to get the 10%, and we got 9.5%, and I need to know if this last 0.5% is a make or break 0.5%. And they want to know. So you create that type of engagement through the stories. So how do you create conversations that engage? One is I love the metaphor of weaving people into work. I'll try and do this with my hands. If you think of creating a fabric on a loom, you got all these threads. They're kind of going off in different directions, like people. This person over here is always thinking about their family when they're at work. This person over here is really excited about this one aspect, but not anything else we're doing. This person's a real team player. It's like they're all going in different directions. And then you got this one thread that goes back and forth like this. And it pulls them together. And as it goes back and forth, it creates the fabric. And the fabric is what has strength and social cohesion. And so when you want to create conversations that engage, you've got to find ways to weave across the individuals that are involved, bring them together iteratively around similar topics, and you start to create the same kind of cohesion. Make the people that you're talking to co-collaborators. So it's not me telling you what to do, but me saying, here's what we need to do. What do you think is the best way to do it? Can you come up with some ideas on your own? And then really support them, not in a paternalistic way of, oh, that's a great idea, thank you very much, but get involved in the mix with them, like you're artists working on something at the same time. Well, have you thought about this? Or maybe we could try this, or backing off a little bit sometimes. So treating someone like they're a true co-collaborator. And the last one is most valuable, which is to generate this idea of a future that we share together. So you asked about storytelling, and the reason that I'm going into all of this is because, again, stories, and it's not just telling them, but it's listening to them, are some of the most effective ways to do this. Is that helpful? Good. Yes.
Hi, my name's David. Thank you for a lot of interesting food for thought. I wanted to unpack one aspect of your comments, and that had to do with creating shared meaning through, I think you said, sharing the same air and the importance of getting together in person. And when I think about some of the communications experts I've heard who have said that meaning comes through body language, through intonation, a little bit through the content of the message, that makes sense. At the same time, EPA and the federal government are promoting methods of working that don't involve sharing the same area through telework, reducing our carbon footprint by not flying to national meetings, and creating communities of practice and community of leadership in geographically disparate areas through electronic media, and using that to create shared meaning and shared vision. Are there strategies that you've experienced, that you've worked with, that can help facilitate that co-creation of meaning amongst groups without necessarily sharing the same errors, so that we can utilize those techniques and respond to our leadership challenges, not to commute, increase our carbon footprint by always getting together in the same place at the same time?
That's a great question, and I think it's really apropos for our time too, and the answer is absolutely yes. All of my experience shows me that the minimal amount of time that people need to be together to work effectively as co-creators of something is once per year. Once per year. So if you're deliberate about that annual face-to-face time, you have a lot of mileage that you can run in the interim, right? But a lot of times what happens is people are not deliberate about it at all, which is they bring people together, they say we'll have a picnic or we'll have a meeting, and you sit there and listen to someone drone on, you don't get to build relationships, and before you know it, it's over, and the real action is going to happen out in the hallways. And that's what I call not being deliberate about that meeting. If you can take that it could even be one day, and really work those relationships so that people get into deep rapport building with each other around their goals and purposes. You can do, online forums and teleconferences and video conferencing just fantastically for a really long period of time. Now, this is assuming that you're not in a crisis. If you're in a crisis, two things happen. One is that generally the people who have to respond to the crisis have shared air, even though they may not be doing it right then. And that works, because what you need is the rapport, and you can do intense coordination as long as you've got it once. Crises do not work well if you pull together a group of people who've never physically been together before and ask them to take major responsibility for some action of coordinating it, right? The second thing is that if you have a really harsh situation or a challenge, then I say, okay, you need to really bring folks together if you can. So it may not be a crisis, but maybe it's a looming crisis or something that's about to happen. But if it's not a crisis and you're really just talking about regular work, I think you can actually go for a very long time working virtually, very successfully. Yeah. Good. Yes?
I have a question about stepping up to the plate and going for it and trying to make a change and just overcome the absolute paralysis of fear, like, oh my God, I can't do this. I've been in the government for like almost 24 years. I was in the military, so I'm just used to the hierarchical, do what you're told, don't challenge the system, and I just feel like it's not as conducive maybe as in the private sector, in the government, because it's hierarchical and it's kind of a dinosaur, and it's just not the way things are done type of thing. So I just find bringing forward ideas and challenging the system very, very terrifying almost.
So you're asking a personal question.
Well, yeah.
About how do you cope with it?
Yeah.
First of all, one of the things I would like to say is that one of the leaders in knowledge sharing and expertise is the military. Mm-hmm. So there are...
I think I'm brainwashed.
Yeah. There's a lot of places where the military is ahead of everyone, including the private sector, on this. So the question might be, what's the particular pocket and role that you're in? And is it unredeemable? Are you in a situation? Sometimes people just happen to be in toxic work environments, and you need to get out and get someplace where it's safe. But it sounded to me like when you were asking the question that, you even used the word brainwash when I started talking, that maybe there's some inner challenge around what you're doing right now. Is that the case?
Well, yeah, also you just don't want to upset the status quo. I get, concerned about how is this going to upset the work environment and what their expectations are and that type of thing.
So let me just ask the room for a second. So I could dialogue with you, but I want to ask the room. How many of you have ever been in a professional situation where you did upset the status quo? Maybe your intention was not to upset the status quo, but your intention was to make a statement of some kind, and as a result, you did upset the status quo. Just raise your hand. So look around. So we've got a lot of hands up for one thing. It's not where we got 5%, it was more like 95%. So that's part of work, that's part of being a professional, is that willingness to step into something. Can we get one or two folks to tell us an experience that they had where they upset the status quo? I think it might be useful. Anyone? Okay, here we go. Give her a microphone.
I'll share because this was not at EPA, so I feel,
so you feel safe.
Kind of safe.
Good.
I was working at